Good morning. I'm Jonathan Slater, host of Tête-à-tête Conversations in Canadian Jewish Studies. Tête-à-tête is a production of the Association for Canadian Jewish Studies, Association d'études juives canadiennes. So this is certainly a first for Tête-à-tête. When we started this podcast, I never would have imagined that a year later we'd be recording our very first live episode here at the 2026 ACJS Annual Conference up at the Israel and Golda Koshitsky Center for Jewish Studies at York University, let alone be the opening event. Now, I do want to acknowledge you all that in front of me here today, we have audience members who've come from all over Canada and from away. So thank you for joining us here this morning to kick off these next 3 days of presentations, events, and activities celebrating 50 years of Canadian Jewish studies. So, my guest today on the podcast is Evelyn Tauben, a curator, producer, and writer based in Toronto and originally from Montreal. She is a leader in the field of contemporary Jewish art and culture with 20 years of experience in museums, galleries, and arts organizations in North America. In 2016, Evelyn launched and continues to spearhead the artist-run gallery FENTSTER, connecting the Jewish experience with contemporary art. She has curated content for festivals and presented at conferences in Canada and overseas. Evelyn's writing has been published in the award-winning book Graphic Details, The Forward, AGS Perspectives, and the Canadian Jewish News, where she contributed a regular arts column. Evelyn currently is the project director of Shvilim, an initiative she and I will be speaking about in depth today during our conversation. Evelyn, welcome to Tête-à-tête.
Thank you for having me.
So, I'm going to guess that more than a few people attending the podcast recording this morning at Community Day at the ACJS conference are hearing about Shvilim for the first time. So how would you describe Shvilim? And let's talk about the name. What does it mean? And why was it chosen?
Good question. Good way to start. I'll just say good morning to everyone. It's wonderful to be here. Shvilim, as many of you will know, is the Hebrew word for paths. And the project, it's the name we gave to an initiative that is dedicated to addressing anti-Semitism in and through the arts, and also celebrating the diversity of Jewish life through the arts. And as you can imagine, there was a lot of brainstorming what we want to call our project. And we landed on this name, and specifically in the plural, to communicate that there are many paths to doing this work, that there doesn't have to be one approach, and also that to signal that we felt that it was time for some new paths to be mapped out, that some of the roads we've been walking aren't serving us well, and it's time for some new pathways.
What do you mean by that? What word serving us well, and the need for new pathways? Can you just expand on that?
Yeah, well, I think we're going to get into it more, but
okay.
In broad strokes, I think that we know that the communal approach to addressing anti-Semitism is not actually helping, and in some times is contributing to polarization and the divisiveness that we see in Canadian communities. And so we wanted to imagine what are some new pathways that also involve creativity, because as we'll talk about, this project started rooted in the arts community.
So we will talk more about the relationship to mitigating anti-Semitism in a few minutes. But let's talk about the arts community. What was happening in the Ontario arts community and in the Jewish community that motivated you to create Shvilim? How did this, because there's a story behind the initiative, how did it get started?
Yeah. Well, first I'll just say that Shvilim started at the initiative of the Ontario Arts Council, and just For those who don't know, that is the provincial funding body for artists and arts organizations. And occasionally the OAC also undertakes partnerships. So this was a partnership with the OAC that when they launched it, they were calling Addressing Antisemitism Through the Arts. So that was actually the impetus, which I think is worth naming, not just to give them credit and kuvit, because also I think it's quite remarkable to have attention, a spotlight put on anti-Semitism and on Jewish culture from an organization that's not rooted in the Jewish community, and particularly coming from the art sector. And but why did they want to do this? I think is at the heart of your question. So I from what I understand, they were, part of their role is scanning what's going on in the sector across the province, and they identified there was a knowledge gap in the arts sector in terms of understanding what anti-Semitism is and how it operates, and also understanding who the Jewish people are and how that relates to telling Jewish stories through art. And relatedly, in a sector that has been pushing for diversity, equity, and inclusion in arts organizations and cultural programming, there was a recognition that anti-Semitism is usually left out of the conversation in trainings, in equity policies, and that there was an opportunity for a corrective and for expanding the conversation.
Well, talking about the arts community, this has been a community that you've been involved in for quite some time. So this initiative quite clearly resonates with you, and at the time that it was initiated must have resonated very strongly. So could you talk a little bit about your experience and your upbringing and how that led you to this point of bootstrapping Shvilim?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, because I really do feel that all these touch points in my upbringing and the people who raised me, you kind of put it all in a blender, and you get this unusual combination of Jewish cultural entrepreneur, which is not like, that doesn't show up when you get a survey in high school of what career you want to have. That's not on the menu, and yet here I am.
Well, was there a specific moment where you said, I've got to do this, and can you walk us through that?
There were a few moments. I mean, as you mentioned, I grew up in Montreal, and the Montreal Jewish community is a particular kind of place, and I see some landsmen here. I grew up learning Hebrew and Yiddish and raised in spaces like Kles Camp and Kles Canada. So like as a kid, being immersed in a living and breathing Jewish culture and art spaces. And my family are artists and educators. My aunt and uncle ran intergenerational Jewish arts programming. So I grew up knowing that this was a thing that one could do, and seeing the impact and the power of bringing people together to get more connected to our own identities, to share our stories with a wider community. Quite a few people here know my mom, who, when she was about my age, went back to grad school and studied Jewish studies at Concordia, and some of her profs are here. And she wrote the book on Montreal's early synagogue. So I was in high school and starting university at the time. So that was pretty transformative, walking in the old Jewish neighborhood with my mom and learning about the buildings that used to be synagogues, and discovering the traces of the past, which is the title of her book. My mom was also the president of the Holocaust Center in Montreal. And if you ask about a specific moment, there was a time when I was in CEGEP where some of my mother's contemporaries started a new committee for Holocaust Education Week, and they brought on their kids, who were my generation. And I ended up, so I was only, I guess I was in CEGEP, and I ended up creating a in-class workshop. We went into high schools in French and English and told a Holocaust story using an object from a collection, a doll.
Fascinating.
And then I ran an art project with the students where they told a story of an object that was important to them that they would want to save. And that was a turning point moment where I was like, how do I keep doing this?
So it
thing?
became top of mind at that point. Yeah.
Appreciating how museums work, how to tell stories through objects, that kind of informal education really resonated for me.
Now, obviously, not all of this initiative is on your shoulders. You're working with people. Your team includes Jewish educators, folks involved in equity work, and community organizers. Can you talk about the essential ingredient of these professionals in the work you're doing?
Yeah, well, it became clear very early on, if we wanted to be contenders for this contract with the Ontario Arts Council, that I'd need to build a team, because FENTSTER is me, a very small Jewish arts organization. And so we had a really multifaceted, amazing team, like the best humans I know, that includes No Silence on Race. Some folks will know No Silence on Race, that are dedicated to telling the stories of multi-ethnic and multiracial Jews. And Sarah Jacoby Harris from No Silence was on our core team. And then we partnered with Shoreline Collaboratives, which is a small equity consulting firm led by amazing queer females, not Jewish. And we really knew early on that we needed people who understood the bigger equity conversation, and that we wanted non-Jews on the team to offer a wider perspective, to balance the conversation.
So these are all people around the table with you. So some are contributing, I guess, full-time. Other people are coming into as consultants, as volunteers. Who are the collaborators?
Almost everyone got paid, but not
okay, good.
Not everyone got paid well. And I'll just say we also had researchers, including Sterling's in the room. We had an education team and we had then there was a wider network of advisors that included some other profs in the room and other academics and a couple people who are part of the AJCS network. I just called up sometimes when I wanted to fact check something.
Excellent.
And we had a wide network of advisors who are artists, arts managers, both Jewish and not Jewish, some rabbis in the mix. It was important to have a wide array of voices, perspectives, lived experiences.
So this has been more than just a team, more than teamwork. This has been a whole collective, I would guess. Let's talk about these foundational educational resources that you're bringing to enhance public understanding of anti-Semitism. Bridging Worlds, and we have some little handouts here in case this will be on the front desk, in case anyone's interested. Explain what Bridging Worlds is all about and how they were developed, how these resources were developed.
Yeah, I'll just say that we undertook a series of initiatives as part of our partnership with the Ontario Arts Council, and Bridging Worlds is kind of the final outcome of this partnership. It's a package of 4 PDF documents created with the arts community in mind, but I think that they're very relevant and engaging for anyone. And there's a lot of overlap between the dynamics we see in the arts community and in academia, for example, and other educational sectors. There's 4, as I mentioned, 4 documents. The first one, we set the stage for who we are, what our values are, and what are some key pieces of understanding that are important to establish before jumping into a deeper dive into understanding anti-Semitism. So we talk a little bit about who are the Jewish people, Jews in Canada, what it means to live in a Christian-dominant society. There's a little mention about the complicated relationship of Jews to whiteness, for example. And we felt that was all important foundational information. And the second document looks at the dynamics of anti-Semitism. One thing we feel is a really significant contribution that the education team spend a lot of time debating and hashing out was distilling a framework for understanding anti-Semitism, which looks at 3 key dynamics: exaggeration of power, blame, and isolation. And for each dynamic, we offer historic examples, contemporary examples, and try to also make connections to the arts community, both historically and today. Documents 3 and 4. Just to say that the third document is on understanding tropes and stereotypes about the Jewish people. And there we really contrast the stereotype with the reality, the lived reality. And we bring an example of how these stereotypes show up in the arts. Because again, we wanted to make it real and relevant and applicable to people who actually work in the arts. There are extreme and blatant examples of anti-Semitism that I think everyone agrees are problematic. And it's also easy for people in the arts to say that has nothing to do with me. So that's why I felt that document was important. The fourth one is called Building Bridges, Burning Bridges. It's very short, and it's more of a conversation prompt that we hope people will engage with together, that look at where we get into sticky spots when Jews and non-Jews try to collaborate in the arts. But it's relevant to many scenarios.
Well, we're going to get into the core of the matter in just a minute or so, the serious talk. I don't think there's anything other than serious talk about anti-Semitism. But I just wanted to ask you, in a recent episode of this podcast, I raised the concern over apparent muzzling of the Jewish literary community in Canada. What kinds of anti-Semitic dynamics are you hearing about, for example, from the community of Jewish artists whom you're involved with?
Yeah, well, one of the things we did early in the project was we put out 2 surveys across the province. One was to leaders of arts organizations in Ontario, and the other was to Jews in the arts, because we wanted to hear about firsthand experiences. So I have a lot to say about your question and what you're getting at, and I just kind of wanted to zoom out for a moment, because I think there's something when I hear your question, I'm reacting to. You referenced anti-Semitic dynamics, and there's a lot of dynamics at play in this moment and in the arts sector and in all of the corners that we occupy. I don't know that it's always anti-Semitism. Like, I feel a resistance to label it anti-Semitic dynamics, and I think that the tendency for Jews to kind of call everything and anything anti-Semitism is part of why we're having trouble advancing conversations and building allied relationships. And there are sometimes tensions, challenges that surface in the arts community that require careful consideration and unpacking. I don't know if I would call it anti-Semitism. And I thought I would bring an example from the literary world, because that's where your question was coming from. As part of our study, I had a follow-up conversation with somebody who answered the survey, who wrote a very interesting answer that I didn't quite understand. So I asked for a phone call. And this person works in young adult fiction. And they told me that often, like more than once, an editor has written on their manuscript, this is not a believable character. This is not how girls behave. And she said, well, every girl I grew up with behaves like this. Meaning, bold, takes up space, confident, maybe sometimes controlling, And she had to make a case over and over again to her editors that this is a believable girl. And the characters weren't explicitly Jewish, so it wasn't an attack on trying to neuter Jewish characters, but it's to me it's more like this is what it looks like to live in a Christian dominant society, and this kind of lens will affect all minorities, and always we try to represent in the arts in a different way than the standard expectation. It's particularly shocking because it means that we're funneling our kids into a certain way of behaving, because this is young adult fiction. But I just wanted to name this because there's a kind of unconscious bias that's important to work on in all communities, but especially if you're telling stories through art. But calling it anti-Semitism I don't believe will bring about the change we want to see. It might, in fact, make people dig in their heels and retract. And I'll get to your question, but
right. No, because I have a sort of more essential question. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just wanted to say that the work ahead for us will be building context for inclusion of all voices and all kinds of representation, and not just fighting or pushing back. However, I understand the heart of your question, and we did hear through our surveys, and I continue to be in constant conversation with Jews in the arts about projects being canceled or putting indefinitely on pause. A play about Israel. One person said there's no room for nuance right now. Somebody talked about a gallerist saying, I don't really feel comfortable showing Jewish work right now. This sort of thing came up. I don't have a way of like quantifying the frequency of it. We also heard from people who run Jewish arts organizations about partnerships kind of drying up, and people who they had previously collaborated with kind of ghosting them and wondering, well, what is this really about? Why aren't they working with us?
Well, let's just talk about this phenomenon of anti-Semitism and Shvilim's relationship to that, because you alluded to this earlier at the beginning of our conversation about Shvilim's approach. Shvilim frames mitigating, even ending anti-Semitism as integral to dismantling all forms of oppression, and argues that anti-Semitism is part of a larger systemic phenomenon of racism and oppression. So can you help us focus on Shvilim's values and approaches? And you started to talk about this, but we have obviously had other things to talk about. But how is such an approach different, as you said, from conventional ways anti-Semitism has tended to be regarded and countered?
Yeah, well, I would say there's kind of 4 pillars to our approach, the way the Shvilim team takes on this work. The first is we believe in advancing the conversation through a holistic and inclusive approach to talking about anti-Semitism and all oppression issues, because we understand that all oppressions are interconnected, that we live in this oppressive system, and that we won't be able to end anti-Semitism without ending other oppressions, and we won't be able to end other oppressions without ending anti-Semitism. So maybe a more blunt way of saying this is that ending anti-Semitism is not just good for Jews. It's good for everyone. But that also means that we need to be allies to other groups and that we're in this together. But another important thing I want to highlight about taking a holistic approach understands that oppressive ideas are baked into our society. It's in the air we breathe. This is the world we grow up in. Nobody's born racist. And I think that I'm going to go on a limb and think it's fair to say that very few people who work in the arts in Ontario woke up today and asked themselves, how can I be more anti-Semitic today?
Right. So what's happening then?
Well, because this is the air we breathe. These biases are baked into our culture, as I said. And so if we have the lens that you don't choose this, but you kind of inherit it, then when people make a mistake or they're confused about anti-Semitism or they're confused about Jews, we don't blame or shame them. We work on connection and building understanding. So that's, I would say, one pillar. The second one is that we're really interested in shifting the conversation in Canada to centering a non-punitive approach. That what we're seeing across the board is an impulse to call for arts events to be canceled, for funding to be pulled, for people to be fired when they say something that we don't like, and so forth. And we don't feel that ultimately this is going to get us to the more healed world that we're hoping for. And a related piece of taking a non-punitive approach is that we've made a commitment to not using the language of combat when talking about anti-Semitism, which is very pervasive and common.
For example?
Well, like I was invited for a forum organized in Ottawa last year that was called the National Forum for Combating Anti-Semitism. That's pretty common. And we hear from calls from the Jewish community to fight anti-Semitism. But I'm a creative. I work in the arts. I'm about building things. I'm not about fighting. I don't want to fight. And when you use the language of combat, it sets up this adversarial relationship between Jews and the rest of the world. And we don't think that's also going to be our way out of the difficult moment that we find ourselves in. And that the current discourse around anti-Semitism is creating division among people who actually have a lot of shared values. The third pillar is that we won't be able to do this alone, that we need to work with allies. And one of the most, maybe the most transformative part of this project for me was meeting the most amazing allies I've ever met in my life.
In the arts community or?
Well, particularly the two leads of Shoreline Collaboratives, Kavita Bisundiel and Erica Pulfer, just jumped into this project full on and really understood why taking on anti-Semitism is part of their shared commitment to ending all oppressions. And just that clarity and their devotion to sticking with us, even when it put them in sometimes challenging situations in the circles they walk in and some of the activist spaces they're in, and never backing down and being so devoted to us as individuals and to this work. Like when we started, we were strangers, and we have really built so much caring between each other, looking out for each other. And
so the initiative built this affinity, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of did the thing that we want to see out in the world, but you don't know when you start how it's going to go. Yeah, we were really in it and living it.
And you have a fourth pillar.
Yeah, the fourth pillar, is almost like an add-on, but I don't want to miss it. It's just the importance of the arts and creativity in doing this work. That's how I move through the world, that I really do believe that having more complex and nuanced conversations can be so facilitated through arts in art spaces.
And I guess your background has helped you in that approach.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and because I see it works, right? Because I've been bringing people together, using art as a communal for over 2 decades, and seeing the transformation, and seeing how people open up and how they build actual relationships that continue out in the world.
Hi there. My name is Joshua Tapper, and I'm the Executive Director of the Association for Canadian Jewish Studies. I want to tell you about a thrilling new initiative we're launching at the ACJS in spring 2026 called the Canadian Jewish Life Writing Project. It's an effort to encourage more Jewish Canadians to write about their own pasts, to think about the entanglements of their Canadian and Jewish identities, and how their experience as Jews has informed their sense of understanding of what it means to be Canadian, and vice versa. With the project, we're putting out a national call for short autobiographical essays that will later archive, digitize, and make freely accessible for anyone to read and research. In this first year of the project, we're asking writers to reflect on the theme of growing up Jewish in Canada. To learn more about the Canadian Jewish Life Writing Project, please visit acjs-aejc.ca/lifewriting, or click on the link in the show notes. We look forward to reading your Canadian Jewish story.
So are there specific developments, because this is a deep and serious conversation about anti-Semitism, and these are tough times that we're in as a community. Are there encouraging signs of cooperation? You started to allude to that, and allyship in the arts community and elsewhere that give you that very important emotion, that very important development of hope.
Yeah, I mean, I can't celebrate enough the allies who are part of this project. And in addition to Kavita and Erica, who I mentioned, I reached out to a handful of non-Jews to be advisors on the project. Some of them I didn't know very well. They were connected to me with by other artists that I know. And I asked them to do this thing, and they said yes. And they showed up. And they came to consultation sessions, and they were a minority, and they shared vulnerably. And these are people, the reason why I invited them is because they run mainstream arts organizations, and they're programming Jewish art in their spaces. I ran an event recently, just in the winter, with Anthony Russell, who's a leading singer of Yiddish music. And his work interweaves his Black heritage and his Jewish heritage. So we wanted to have a conversation that kind of told his story but widened it out. And I invited another Black artist who explores her heritage through her work, through dance. And, you know, to be honest, I kept thinking, first I thought she wouldn't accept. Then I thought she would change her mind. Then I thought, well, she'll come, but she won't promote it, you know. But none of those things were true, you know. She didn't. She came. She posted on social media. We hugged when we saw each other. She was wholeheartedly in it, and I think that what I'm seeing is our fear is sometimes holding us back from reaching for those connections across points of difference, and from believing that Jewish stories can coexist with other stories in art spaces.
These points of connection, these are promoting dialogue. Yeah, interesting. Okay. So if you could, you had mentioned earlier that there weren't necessarily empirical ways of evaluating the effect, the impact of Shvilim and what you're doing. What are some of the challenges of evaluating the reach, the effect in the arts community elsewhere, in outside of the Jewish community, for example? How are you gauging your success?
I think impact is a good question, and it makes sense that you're asking me about it. And it's a hard question, and it's a thing I really struggle with as someone who works in the arts, because we're always being especially in Jewish arts and culture, that the community wants to know what's the impact of the donor dollars. And I always say, like, can you imagine if someone asked Chagall to demonstrate the impact of his work on Jewish continuity? You know, so some of this, I think, becomes kind of an absurd and impossible task. And it's similar in equity work. I mean, this is my first official project in the equity space, but my colleagues say this is a similar challenge. How do you prove that you're making an impact when the work is about changing hearts and minds, and hopefully in the long time affecting systemic change? So it's a long game. And this need to prove impact is sometimes why equity projects get deprioritized and defunded. And I would say the same for the arts. So, our particular project is so new. Like, we're still in the process of getting the word out that this even exists, that these resources are available. But I guess I would say what I would like to see is that partnerships continue and grow, that art spaces are telling Jewish stories through art and are not hanging back. telling Jewish stories, that I would like to see, part of the impact I would like to see, that Jews feel confident and comfortable stepping fully into the arts community. And that's not going to be fully up to the rest of the world. Like, we have to do some of our own work on our fear and all of the internalized distresses that we have. But that would be an ideal scenario I'd be looking at.
Well, you said this is a new initiative, and therefore the work that you're doing is very much rooted in the present, and you're looking for outcomes in the present. And so therefore, I guess it would be a challenge. It might be somewhat difficult to abstract, to project into the future. But let me put you on the spot. Okay. What's in store for the future? Do you have some ideas? Where do you want to go with this project?
There's a lot of ideas. There's no shortage of ideas. Well, as I mentioned, we're a team that came together to answer this call from the Ontario Arts Council. So this was a project team. And it's not so clear, how do you translate that into something ongoing? And our world isn't really set up in that way. We kind of think about established organizations and so forth. However, there's enough people on the team that care so much about making a change, about sharing our approach to addressing anti-Semitism more widely, about sharing the way we're educating on the topic through Bridging Worlds, that we're in a dreaming process now of thinking about where we could go from here. And I guess I would just say, if anyone's here or anyone's listening who sees themselves in this work, who feels it resonates, and you see an opportunity for partnership or for getting involved, we're in this moment where a lot is possible, and we're excited to have those conversations. Some of them have been with ACJS at some points. So we'll see.
We'll see.
Keep you posted.
We'll
you
see.
can have me back to talk about it.
Before I get to my final question, there's one thing, because we have an audience in front of us today. Is there something you'd like the audience to know about your story in general, or specific to FENTSTER or Shvilim and the work you do? Is there something that I haven't asked you that you definitely want to share with our audience today?
Well, there was something I had in mind that we were talking about earlier that I didn't quite get to, so maybe I'll jump back to that.
Go right ahead, yes.
When we were talking about a climate where Jews in the arts are feeling stifled, and that we're hearing about projects being canceled or paused, I do want to name that we are also heard from Jews in the arts and non-Jews of also feeling ramifications of their Palestinian solidarity work. And that is a large reason why we are advocating for non-punitive approaches. That for me, it's not a win when a screening of a documentary gets canceled. Whatever side of the political conversation it falls on, that we need to share the work and then have the hard conversations. But just to be clear, that there's a shutting down happening across the board, and it's creating a really chilling effect. And something we haven't gotten to yet that we heard a lot in our survey, and I continue to hear from Jews in the arts, is about self-censorship. And it's to the point where some folks are removing any mention on their artist's website, even of the fact that they're Jewish. And they are concerned that just being Jewish automatically lumps them in with a whole set of ideas and politics and policies that they don't feel aligned with. And the easiest way to not be aligned with that is just to hide. And, I find this incredibly sad.
It is. Is there, in your work, is there something that you're doing to mitigate this phenomenon? We've talked about mitigating anti-Semitism in general, but this self-censorship is particularly disturbing, and I read about it all the time. So is there something that you would recommend in this instance?
Well, a small but mighty offering that I've made for Jews in the Arts is I started hosting these gatherings in November 2023. This specifically for Jews in the Arts. It's a highly facilitated context with communication guidelines. It's not about shouting and debating and advancing political solutions and advancing your best argument for, how to get out of this mess. It's about people sharing openly and honestly about their experiences, their hurt places, their stuck places. And I really do believe there's transformational power in being listened to and unburdening your heart a little bit, taking the armor off your heart, just letting out that breath and feeling, I'm in a room with fellow Jews who have chosen to make a life in the arts, who are feeling like this is a hard time, even if we don't all agree with each other. And by the way we set it up, make space for sharing space without agreeing. It's never gotten explosive. It's been very moving. It's gone much better than I thought it would. I thought we would do it once, but then people said, when's the next one? So I said, I guess I have to keep doing this. And we met again last week. And I do think it's going to take big initiatives, but it's also going to take these small, intentional, thoughtful initiatives that is going to move the needle. And where I'm hoping to go with this space, well, I personally haven't been ready, and I don't think this little community I'm building has been ready, is that in a future session, we each invite a non-Jewish buddy in the arts, and we start to widen the conversation, and we start to listen to more perspectives than we've been hearing.
Well, let's talk about people in the Jewish arts community, and particularly young Jewish artists. And I don't know if there are any artists in the audience today. There certainly will be those who will be listening when the podcast is released. Do you have any specific advice that you'd share with a young Jewish artist attending here today or listening in the podcast when it comes out? Any specific advice? And is there a place? I mean, it's a mixed picture, right? Is there a place for them in the arts?
First, I want to say yes, there's a place for them in the arts. And sometimes when it doesn't seem that way, this is what I'm trying to get at. It's not when we feel that the arts community has become inhospitable to Jews, how much is that based on reality? And how much is that based on this trail of trauma that we carry with us where we feel the world is a scary place? And it has, I mean, I don't want to undermine and diminish that these are scary times.
No, certainly not.
But there's work to do all around in trying to assess what is a perceived risk and what's an actual risk in front of us. And I believe that artists should make art about whatever they want to make art about. But that Jewish artists should not be afraid about making art that explores the Jewish experience. But even before October 7th and the contracting of these last few years, one reason that FENTSTER was so important is because it's not, making art about Jewish stories does not necessarily present wide career opportunities. There's not a lot of places to show work. There's almost nowhere to go in the Jewish community to get your work funded in all of Canada. You can get more support from the government arts councils for making a Jewish arts project than you can from the Jewish community. So if we want to bolster a Jewish arts scene, it's going to have to be a shared commitment. If we want Jews to feel like this is a path they can walk, that they need to be supported. So it's been an uphill battle from before October 7th. I just want to name that. But when I started FENTSTER, artists started approaching me very quickly who had never made work explicitly about being Jewish, but they were excited about the context and they wanted to dive in. So it is a kind of if you build it, they will come
situation.
So
how can they connect with you? People listening, how can they connect with Shvilim? What would you suggest?
FENTSTER.org.
Okay.
I guess we'll put it in the notes because it's a Yiddish word that's not always spelled correctly and transliterated. And Shvilim is a Hebrew word, but FENTSTER.org/Shvilim.
And that goes for community organizations as well, not just individual artists?
Yeah, we'd love to hear from organizations. I mean, when you ask about what's next, we know there's a need for a different kind of training and workshops on anti-Semitism than what's currently available in Canada. And we're interested in being one of the addresses that people turn to. So if there's an organization that's wanting to host a conversation within their space, get in touch. And I'd love to develop something.
Well, look, Evelyn, thank you so much for talking with me about Shvilim and FENTSTER here today. And a special thank you to our audience for attending our first ever live taping on Tête-à-tête. I'm Jonathan Slater, and you've been listening to our live recording of Tête-à-tête featuring our very talented guest, Evelyn Tauben. On behalf of everyone here at Tête-à-tête, I'd like to thank you all for joining us in these wonderful discussions. It's been a real treat for me to sit down every month with such a wide array of superb guests, and we can't wait to welcome you back for new conversations in the fall. This show was produced and edited by Theodora Draper in Toronto. Our music is provided by J.K. Bradley. Our executive producers are Joshua Tapper and David Kaufman. Tête-à-tête is a podcast of the Association for Canadian Jewish Studies. You can find out more about the ACJS and link to our journal and past podcast episodes by checking out our website, acjs-aejc.ca. We're grateful to our supporters, the Israel and Golda Kashitsky Center for Jewish Studies, the Social Science and Humanities Research Council's Aid to Scholarly Journals program, and the J. Richard Schiff Chair for the Study of Canadian Jewry. The ACJS Annual Conference is sponsored by the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. In the show notes, you can find a transcript of my conversation with Evelyn Tauben and a link to the FENTSTER website where you can learn more about Shvilim. You can also order print copies of current and past issues of the ACJS journal, Canadian Jewish Studies, Études Juives Canadiennes. We'd love it if you could share, like, and rate our podcast. You're also invited to add your email to the ACJS's occasional newsletter or support the ACJS's amazing work by following links in the show notes. If you have comments or thoughts about this podcast episode or any other of our episodes, feel free to email us at acjs@yorku.ca. Come back and join us for another conversation.